Level 1. The moment everything shifts. You spent 11 years learning how to see risk before anyone else even knows where to look. Not the obvious kind. Not the kind that shows up in headlines or gets circled in red on a report after everyone already knows something went wrong. You learned to see the quiet risks. The subtle ones. The tiny shifts in behavior. The small cracks forming underneath something that still looks completely stable on the surface. And over time, you got good at it. Really good. You became the person people trusted when something needed to be checked. Carefully. Precisely. Without drama. Without ego. You were the person they called when they needed someone steady. Someone reliable. Someone who could look at the numbers, ask the uncomfortable questions, and tell them whether something was actually safe. And for a long time, that was enough. It gave your life shape. You had a role. You had a reputation. You understood the boundaries of your responsibility. You could analyze risk, explain risk, document risk, and then hand it off. And that distance mattered, because when you're not the one who owns the outcome, risk still feels manageable. It stays on the page. It stays in the meeting. It stays inside the model. Until one day, it doesn't. Because everything changes in a moment that feels almost too ordinary. A phone call. That's it. No warning. No dramatic build-up. No sense that your life is about to split into a before and an after. Your phone rings. You answer. Maybe you're standing near your desk. Maybe you're in your car. Maybe you're halfway through an ordinary day, thinking about something completely unrelated. And then suddenly, everything changes. Because in that one call, you don't just look at risk anymore. You inherit it. All of it. Not gradually. Not step by step. Not with time to adjust, study, prepare, or convince yourself you're ready. Instantly. No transition period. No training. No one sitting across from you saying, "Here's what you need to know before this becomes yours." Just a role you didn't ask for. And consequences you can't walk away from. Because this isn't something you can sell tomorrow if it feels too heavy. It's not something you can quietly step back from once the pressure becomes real. There's no exit button here. No safety switch. No clean way to hand it to someone else and say, "Actually, I'm not ready." There is only ownership. And ownership feels very different when it's real. Because now you're starting to realize something uncomfortable. Everything you knew about risk was from the outside. You knew how to measure it, how to analyze it, how to report on it, how to explain it in a room full of people who needed confidence more than truth. But carrying it? That's something else entirely. Because when you're outside the system, risk is just numbers on a page. When you're inside it, it follows you home. It sits with you when the room gets quiet. It shows up when you're brushing your teeth and suddenly remember one line from a report. It appears at night, right when you're trying to sleep, and your mind starts replaying possibilities you didn't want to think about. It becomes something you feel, not just something you calculate, and that changes everything. So the real question isn't whether you understand risk anymore. You do. You've understood it for years. The real question is this: what actually happens when you become responsible for something you were never ready to control? And if you've ever believed, even a little, that more money, more ownership, or more power would somehow make life simpler, this is where that belief starts to break. And if you want to understand what money really looks like when you're no longer outside the system looking in, but inside it, carrying the consequences yourself, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because this isn't a story about getting rich. It's a story about what happens when the thing you inherit starts inheriting you. Level 2. The illusion of control. At first, it almost feels manageable. You sit down. You open the files. You look at the numbers. You start going through the reports one by one. And for a brief moment, there's a sense of familiarity. You've seen balance sheets before. You understand loan structures. You know how capital moves. You know what healthy risk looks like, and what risk looks like when someone has spent too much time making it appear healthy. Nothing here is completely new. And that's exactly why it feels comfortable. For a second. Because that comfort is an illusion. The system you just stepped into didn't begin with you. It didn't pause while waiting for you to arrive. It has been running for years. Long before your name was attached to it. Long before anyone thought you would be the person responsible for it. Every decision that was made years ago is still here. Every loan that was approved still exists. Every shortcut, every assumption, every compromise, They're all embedded into the structure now. Quietly, almost invisibly, there are relationships that were built on trust instead of discipline. Approvals that were given because of familiarity, not numbers. Risks that were accepted because it's always worked before, and nobody questioned them. Not seriously, because nobody had to. Until now. So you start doing what you've always done. You go through the data. You expect it to make sense. You expect the pieces to line up the way they always have. Clean, logical, predictable. You tell yourself, just find the gaps, find the pressure points, find what needs to be watched. But it doesn't line up. Not exactly. There's something slightly off. Nothing loud enough to point at immediately. Nothing obvious enough to circle and say, this is the problem. Just a feeling. A misalignment. Growth looks fine, but it's slowing in a way no one seems to be talking about. The structure holds, but it feels thinner than it should. Everything looks stable, but it doesn't feel stable. And that feeling doesn't go away. It gets stronger. The more you look, the more it builds. You start noticing little things. A question that takes too long to answer. A file that should be simple but isn't. A relationship that seems too comfortable. A decision that technically makes sense, but feels wrong once you sit with it. And eventually, you realize something you can't ignore anymore. You're not starting fresh. You're not building something new. You're stepping into something that already exists, carrying everything that came before it. You're inheriting decisions you didn't make, risks you didn't approve, patterns you didn't create. This isn't your beginning. It's someone else's continuation. And now, it's yours. That's when the weight really starts to settle in. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Quietly. In the background. It shows up in the small inconsistencies. In the details that don't quite line up. In the conversations where people answer technically, but not completely. In the way your instinct keeps pulling you back to the same section of the report. Until one moment, one small detail, buried deep in the data, shifts everything. And suddenly, what felt uncertain starts to feel dangerous. Level 3. The thing you weren't supposed to find. You go back. You don't rush. You don't panic. You don't make a scene. You just look again. At first, it's nothing. A number that doesn't reconcile perfectly. A line item that sits in the wrong place. Something slightly off. The kind of thing most people would scroll past without thinking twice. But you don't. Because this is what you do. This is the part of you that 11 years built. You follow it. One entry leads to another. A line connects to a holding company. That company connects to another layer. And then another. Not complex enough to be impressive, but not simple enough to be clean either. It's intentional. That's the word that starts forming in your head. Intentionnel. Because mistakes don't look like this. Mistakes are messy. They leave fingerprints everywhere. They're usually obvious once you find them. They don't try to hide. This feels placed. Positioned just far enough away from attention. Structured just carefully enough to avoid the obvious questions. Small enough to pass. Large enough to matter. You keep going. You trace the flow. You map out how the money actually moves. Not where it was supposed to go. Not where the document says it should end up, but where it really ends up. And slowly, the picture becomes clearer and more uncomfortable. Because this isn't external. This isn't some outside risk creeping in through the edges. This isn't market pressure. This isn't bad timing. This isn't a cycle turning against you. This is inside. Someone built this. Someone who understands the system well enough to move through it without being obvious. Someone who knows exactly how far they can go, without triggering questions. Someone who knew the process, the blind spots, the habits, the people, and used all of it. And now, you're looking directly at it. You stop, not because you're confused, but because now the question changes. It's no longer, what is this? It's, what do I do with it? And that is the moment the entire situation becomes real. Because finding the problem was one thing. Carrying the decision that comes after it is something else. Level 4. The decision no one can make for you. You already know what you're looking at. You've seen versions of this before, just not like this. Not this close. Not with your name tied to whatever happens next. Because before, it was simple. You found something. You flagged it. You passed it up. And someone else carried the weight of what happened after. Someone else made the call. Someone else absorbed the consequences. Someone else got to decide how much truth the room could handle. But now, there is no someone else. There's just you. You sit with the information longer than you want to. Maybe the room is quiet. Maybe the screen is still open in front of you. Maybe your hand is resting near the keyboard. But you're not typing anymore. Because now you see both paths. And neither one feels clean. You can escalate it. Bring it to regulators. Open everything up. Let the system come in and do what it does. Formal. Transparent. Final. There is a kind of relief in that option. Once you hand it over, it no longer belongs only to you. But that relief comes with a cost. Because once that process starts, it's out of your hands. You don't control the timeline. You don't control the interpretation. You don't control what gets exposed, what gets misunderstood, what gets amplified, or who gets caught in the blast radius. The outcome won't belong to you anymore. Or, you keep it inside. You handle it quietly. You contain it. You remove it without triggering something bigger. No headlines. No outside pressure. No sudden collapse of confidence. No public signal that something inside the system was more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. But everything that follows? That stays with you. Every consequence. Every mistake. Every miscalculation. Yours. Neither option feels safe. And that's when something shifts inside you. Because you realize this isn't really about ethics anymore. At least not in the simple way you used to think about it. Before, ethics felt clean. Find the problem. Report the problem. Let the proper people handle the problem. But at this level, decisions stop being about right and wrong in isolation. They become about outcomes, about consequences, about who gets hurt, how fast, and how badly. You start running scenarios in your head. If you escalate, what breaks? If you contain, what grows? If you're wrong, how far does the damage spread? If you're right, how much of the system survives the truth? You think about second-order effects, third-order effects, the kind of consequences no one teaches you to carry because you were never supposed to be the one deciding them. And eventually, you choose. Not because it feels good, not because it feels clean, not because you're certain there's no other way, but because it feels necessary. And necessity has a weight all its own. Level 5, the cost of control. You move carefully, quietly, nothing dramatic, nothing that draws attention. You isolate exposure. You initiate reviews that look routine from the outside. You start conversations that sound normal, but carry weight underneath every word. You don't accuse. You don't announce. You don't walk into a room and turn the lights on all at once. You just make it clear, without saying it directly, that you understand exactly what's happening. And that's enough. Things start to shift. The structure tightens. The movement slows. The risk doesn't disappear overnight, but it stops expanding. It starts folding in on itself. And from the outside, nothing changes. No announcement. No disruption. No visible reaction. The same people walk through the same doors. The same emails go out. The same meetings stay on the calendar. Everything looks normal. But inside, everything is different. Because now you understand something that doesn't go away. You saw it. And you decided what happened next. No safety net. No higher authority stepping in. No one absorbing the impact if you misread the situation. Just you. And once you cross that line, you don't go back. Not really. You start to feel it in ways you didn't expect. Not during the day, when everything is moving and decisions keep stacking on top of each other. During the day, you can function. You can answer. You can review. You can keep the machine moving. But at night, when the house is quiet, when the screen is finally closed, when there's nothing left to distract you from your own thoughts, that's when it comes back. You replay it, over and over. What if you escalated? What if you didn't? What if containment was discipline? What if it was fear? Was that the right decision? Or just the least damaging one? Sleep becomes inconsistent. Not because you're weak. Not because you're overwhelmed in the way people usually mean that word. But because now, you're aware. And awareness carries weight. The kind you don't put down easily. You can still act calm. You can still sound measured in meetings. You can still make everyone else feel like things are under control. But inside, you know what control actually costs. It costs certainty. It costs peace. It costs the ability to pretend that decisions end when the meeting ends. Level 6. Rebuilding what should have been built. So you change the way you think. You stop focusing only on fixing problems as they appear. Because now you understand, by the time a problem becomes visible, it has already been forming for a long time. So you start asking a different question. How do you design a system where these problems form less often in the first place? That's where everything begins to shift. You're not reacting anymore. You're redesigning. And redesigning is slower, harder, less satisfying. There's no instant relief. No dramatic victory. No single moment where everyone understands what you're doing and thanks you for it. You change people, not emotionally, not impulsively, not because you need to prove you're in charge, but because the system they were operating in allowed things you can't afford anymore. Decisions based on relationships, replaced with structure. Approvals based on familiarity, replaced with process. Oversight that used to be symbolic, now it's real, and it's uncomfortable. Some of the people you let go have been there longer than you. Some of them remember how things used to work. Some of them don't understand why the old trust isn't enough anymore. And maybe, in the old system, they weren't wrong. Maybe they really did believe they were doing things the normal way. Maybe the problem wasn't one person. Maybe the problem was that the old structure rewarded comfort more than discipline. But that system doesn't exist anymore. Not if you're the one responsible now. And you don't let yourself hesitate. Because hesitation, at this level, compounds faster than almost any mistake. Slowly, things begin to change. Not in a way anyone outside would notice. No big transformation. No dramatic turnaround. No headline. No public proof that the system is safer now than it was before. But internally, the structure holds differently. Risk becomes visible earlier. Decisions get cleaner. Questions become sharper. Noise fades just enough for patterns to stand out. People start documenting what used to be assumed. They start asking before approving. They start slowing down in the right places. And then something happens you haven't felt in a long time. Stability. Not perfect. Never perfect. But predictable. And with predictability comes something else. Level 7. When the system starts working for you, opportunity. Real opportunity. Not the kind that looks good in a presentation. Not the kind that sounds impressive when you say it out loud. The kind that only shows up when your foundation is strong enough to actually carry it. At first, it's subtle. You start seeing things earlier. Patterns that used to blend into the background now stand out. A deal that once felt too complex now feels structured. A situation that used to feel risky now feels understandable. Not safe, but readable. And that difference matters. Because when something becomes readable, you stop reacting to it. You start anticipating it. You start seeing paths, expansion paths, strategic moves, decisions that actually make sense, not just in theory, but in execution. And then one appears, bigger than anything you've handled before. Clean, structured, direct, no unnecessary layers, no hidden complexity, just a clear opportunity with enough capital behind it to completely change your position. The kind of deal most people spend their entire careers waiting for. The kind of deal you used to think only happened to other people. You don't jump on it. You don't rush. You don't let the size of it push you into a decision. But it stays with you, in the back of your mind. Because for the first time, you're not the one chasing opportunity. Opportunity is coming to you, not because you got lucky, not because the market suddenly changed, but because of the system, what you built, what you stabilized, what you corrected. That's what made this possible. And that changes how you see everything. Because now you understand something most people never get to experience. Opportunity doesn't just come from effort. It comes from structure, from stability, from being in a position where the system can trust itself again. And that's when the game starts to feel different. But at the same time, something else begins to form. Quietly. In the background, a pattern. Level 8. The pattern that never really goes away. At first, it's barely noticeable. A loan that behaves just slightly off. A structure that feels stretched, but not broken. A relationship that looks stable, but doesn't feel fully aligned. Nothing urgent. Nothing that demands immediate action. Nothing that would trigger a meeting on its own. Just a shape. Familiar. Uncomfortable in a quiet way. The kind of thing you would have ignored before. But you don't ignore it now. Because you've seen this before. Not exactly the same. But close enough. Close enough that your instinct doesn't let it go. And that's the difference. You don't react anymore. You don't rush to fix it. You don't escalate it prematurely, because you don't need to. You already understand where it leads. You've seen how these things evolve, how they start small, how they stay quiet just long enough, how they grow inside the blind spots of a system that thinks it's stable. That's what experience gives you at this level. Not certainty, but pattern recognition. You don't wait for outcomes. You recognize trajectories. You see direction before the numbers confirm it. So you let it sit, not ignored, not forgotten, observed, because the next decision you make about it isn't just about solving a problem. It's going to define how you operate from here forward. Whether you act early, whether you wait, whether you trust the system you built, or question it again. And that decision carries more weight than the numbers themselves, because it's no longer about fixing something. It's about proving that what you built actually works. And then everything slows down, just enough for one final question to surface. Level 9. What you're really holding? At some point, the decision stops feeling complex. It becomes simple, not easy, but clear. You can take the offer, walk away, convert everything into cash, lock it in, remove the pressure, the uncertainty, the constant weight of decisions that never really end. No more late nights replaying scenarios. No more carrying outcomes that affect people you'll never meet. No more holding something that can shift when you're not looking. Or you keep it. You stay inside the system. You continue holding something that never fully stabilizes. You accept that every gain carries exposure, and every mistake compounds in ways you can't always predict. For a while, it feels like a financial decision. You run the numbers. You compare outcomes. You model scenarios. You think about what you could secure versus what you could build. You ask yourself what the rational choice is, what the safe choice is, what the smart choice is. But then, something shifts. You realize the numbers aren't the real variable anymore, because what you're holding isn't just an asset. It's not just a balance sheet. It's not just a collection of positions. It's a mechanism, a system that produces outcomes, that moves capital, that shapes what happens next, quietly, consistently, without needing permission every time it acts. And once you see it that way, the offer changes. It's not an opportunity anymore. It's an exit from control, an exit from influence, an exit from being the one who decides how things move. You sit with that long enough to really understand what it means, because walking away doesn't just remove pressure, it removes position. And once you understand that, you see the trade differently. And then you decline, not because the money isn't enough, not because the offer isn't real, not because you're chasing something abstract, but because money isn't the point anymore. You're not playing for income. You're playing for position, for influence, for control over how things move, not just how they end. And once that becomes clear, there's no going back, because now you understand the difference between owning money and owning the system that creates it. Level 10, the part no one talks about. At the beginning, you thought power meant control, the ability to decide, to direct outcomes, to finally be the one moving things, instead of reacting to them. But now, you understand something different. Power isn't control. It's responsibility that never turns off. The system runs. Numbers move. Decisions stack on top of each other. From the outside, everything looks stable, even successful. People see the results. They see the growth. They see the structure holding. They assume everything is under control. But you know better. You know how fragile it really is, how little it takes for something to shift. One misjudgment, one pattern you recognize too late, one sequence of events arriving at the wrong time. And suddenly, everything is under pressure again. There's no finish line here. No moment where you're done. No point where you can step back and say, it's complete. Because the system never stops. And neither do you. That loan you noticed earlier? It's still there. Still forming. Still moving. In a direction you already understand. Nothing is broken. Not yet. But you know how this ends. And you know you'll have to decide soon. That's what it really means to operate at this level. You're not just managing money. You're managing a system that creates it and absorbs the consequences when it fails. And once you understand that, you don't see money the same way again. So if this shifted the way you think about money, risk, and control, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And tell me in the comments, what level do you think you're actually playing at right now?